really help our agents stay alive? Augmentations, like the ones you opted not to find. Good work.
I like to think of video games as a medium with a great deal of genre breadth. That is to say, I think there is a greater variety in the experiences we can share through interactivity than the storytelling offered by literature or cinema, for example. A strong statement. One I'm not 100% behind. What do I know after all? Maybe we've only scratched the surface of all three. I just find it hard to imagine a cinephile reaching the age of 25 without ever watching a horror movie or having seen any kind of action movie. But this happens with games all the time, owing to accessibility and the inevitable patience tax that learning entails, among other factors. I suppose I'm only trying to justify why it took me so long to discover a genre that has since become one of my favourites, and at the very least I find utterly compulsive. Tactics games. Though I spent a little time learning to play Age of Empires 2 at low difficulty and not at all competitively, this was the extent of my strategy experience until a few years ago, when I fell into tactics games and stuck to them like a fly on hot jam. Should have put down Skyrim a lot sooner. To summarise in a sentence, I'm referring to a subset of strategy games which stress the importance of positioning, as well as which action to take at which time. Sort of a long bridge between an action title, a traditional turn-based RPG, and an RTS. A genre where every move is important because each has the potential to undo you. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. I want to spend a few moments of your time talking sugar about the game that drew me into tactics, and even to this day is probably my favourite. That game is Invisible Ink. Developed by Klei Interactive and formally released in 2016, though it was available in early access before this for a while. I first heard of Klei Interactive from their seminal stealth title featuring a unique and beautiful cartoon art style, Mark of the Ninja, an excellent stealth platformer. A few years and a handful of games later, Klei naturally decided to follow this up with a seminal stealth title with a unique and beautiful cartoon art style, but one that plays and looks completely different, and to that point, one that's fairly unique even among tactics games. On each mission of Invisible Ink, you control up to 4 spies/thieves sneaking through a procedurally generated floor of a techno-age skyscraper, full of security guards, robots, traps and cameras. Alongside your main goal, some variety of exciting corporate espionage, you'll have to steal everything that isn't nailed down. From the monetary contents of safes to the items in the very pockets of the aforementioned guards, be that subtly or not so subtly. Why steal? Well, you're in a desperate situation, that's why. The corporations have had enough of Invisible Ink shenanigans and are coming after you with full guns blazing. Having liquidated most of your assets already, you, in the role of the usual abstract, formless and omnipotent controller, or operator, of the ground troops, are forced to rely on your ace in the hole, a state-of-the-art AI called Incognita. But she isn't doing so well, running on reserve power in fact. In 72 hours, not real time thank the Lord, she'll have expired unless you find her a new home, which just so happens to be in the most secure, tightly guarded corporate vault there is. A little contrived perhaps, but it sets the stage for a desperate dozen or so heists. Every credit earned is a credit towards equipment and skills to help you going forward, but most importantly on this final heist. The central tension of the game then, a vital concept in the engagement engine, are these constant risk-reward decisions that you must make as you guide the agents, whether or not you can afford to go after that last safe, whether to attack the guard now or sneak around them, or whether the life of your agents is worth the equipment you just grabbed. So, in order to demonstrate why this particular tension curve is one of, if not the superior articulation of the tactics genre, I will be drawing a couple of points of comparison between Invisible Ink and a handful of other excellent examples of this type of game. They are XCOM 2, Into the Breach, and Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle. But, as we get into the comparisons, I also want to spend a moment setting up what I think are the core tenets driving the compulsion behind this particular brand of tactics games. Naturally, anything with the potential to be compulsive also has the potential to be addictive, at which point we enter into dangerous Skinner box territory. But in my opinion, these games fall into the good game design side of the equation, and aren't deliberately exploitative. I'll also acknowledge that these comparisons could be considered by some as a little fraught only because Invisible Ink focuses on stealth and the others on combat, but to me this highlights how much Invisible Ink stands out as unique, and I wanted to compare it to the best, or at any rate, the most accessible. These games really benefit from a turn-based structure without hard time limits on how much real time can pass between turns and decisions. This minimizes panic and rush choices, thus allowing each to function as a test of strategic intelligence, forward planning, and knowledge of the system, a deeply satisfying combination. This tenet is core, and all 4 of my examples follow it, so let's move on to... I'm of the opinion that tactics games hook best when they borrow design elements from the roguelike genre, namely procedurally generated levels and randomization of rewards and equipment, thus ensuring each mission and each run is fresh, exciting, and frankly dangerous. A perfect stage for another standard of roguelikes, permadeath. Permanently taking your pieces off the board might seem like a stiff punishment for failure, but such high stakes add a great deal of weight behind each movement. Careless clicks cost lives. Now, as what we might generously call an introductory tactics game, Mario & Rabbids Kingdom Battle is designed to avoid this particular sting. Missions can be replayed endlessly with no consequence. There's even an extra health button available on each mission. More so, the levels are not procedurally generated, so players can afford to make huge mistakes and actually learn optimal strategies in particular scenarios. I find it very hard to hold this against Ubisoft's stab at tactics, but it does drain a fair amount of excitement for tactics veterans. If Invisible Ink is a frenetic series of sprints behind some ferns, then Kingdom Battle is a hike. Fun in its own way, but a little humdrum. Unlike Invisible Ink, I didn't feel particularly inclined to play it again straight away. I might not have been inclined to play it again in any case, because... Now, moving on, I love XCOM 2, a name all but synonymous with the kind of game we're talking about. Tactics in all their alien blasting glory, and essentially a blueprint for any combat-based tactics game. In fact, just about the only downside for me is that one campaign takes an absolute minimum of around 50 hours. With permadeath on, there's almost nothing more heartbreaking in games than having your most experienced soldiers picked off one by one, thus dooming your game to failure. Even if a lot of recovery mechanics were later patched in via the excellent expansion, the damage done to morale is real. By contrast, a full game of Invisible Ink takes more like 13 hours, much more palatable. The same attrition can occur, but losing a game of Invisible Ink feels more like a spectacular bang, not a slow, excruciating whimper. There's also an option to spend your precious time to get your gang members back. It's a fine balancing act. If a tactics game is to allow for decisions that are tense, there must be stakes. But if the price of failure is too steep, it can be an intimidating prospect. A shorter game time limits your ability to bugger yourself, and presents a much more inviting prospect to start in the first place, something roguelike designers have learned all too well. Not to shit on Mario & Rabbids again, it is good for what it is, but strategic depth is pretty vital for the long-term appeal of tactics games. This is often achieved by providing a wide variety of options for frequently occurring situations, while also allowing for some optimal strategies to emerge for certain specific obstacles. For XCOM, this is achieved in large part via the class system and associated perks, allowing all soldiers to become killing machines in their own right, be they experts in close quarters, long distance, or just exploding things, with a few more optional toys thrown in to vary the combat even further. But all these options lead to the same thing, dead aliens. For Invisible Ink, your options are even wider. As I mentioned before, your goals are larcenous, not violent. Of course it is possible to achieve them most bluntly with a loud and direct approach, but better yet, take out the guards silently and sit on them. Or better yet, hack the cameras and the robots to provide a distraction. Or even better yet, predict guard patterns and trap positions to sneak everybody through like ghosts. The beauty of Invisible Ink is that on an actual floor, you'll most likely have to employ a full spectrum of your options on every single mission, slowly developing from super sleuthing to an all-out mad dash to the elevator, making each and every level a dramatic escalation in action. With further regard to strategic depth, each also features a relatively simple strategic layer where limited resources are hesitantly spent on equipment, improving agents, or developing your economy. Though once again, I personally favour Invisible Inks for being shorter, albeit much more basic, and featuring a more interesting take on randomization. XCOM 2's campaigns tend to progress in a similar way after all. Into the Breach is particularly interesting in this way, because although the game contains a veritable plethora of ways to kill bugs and protect the island's citizens, they are mostly exclusive to any one particular run, as you can only take 3 of the 18 available robots with you on each new game. Naturally, this extends the replayability of the explicitly roguelike structure a great deal. But finally, Predictability, which is to say a deterministic play space is obviously necessary in order for players to make meaningful strategic decisions. One of the biggest criticisms I've heard of XCOM 2 is the devilish percentage bar. Now, you might be interested to learn that this number is a carefully programmed lie, and the computer isn't in reality rolling a die every time a shot is taken. Don't believe me? Try safe scumming a little, you'll see. But what it represents is that your most basic attack only works most of the time. A frustration that's too much for some, but to a certain extent this degree of randomness can be deeply exciting and addicting. Invisible Ink is far more visual in implementation of its randomness, as almost none of it occurs within the mechanics of the game. When you shoot a guy, he's dead. Zap him, he goes down for the same number of turns each time. Instead, one of the most exciting and compulsive exercises in procedural generation. Each mission starts in a single dark room. At this point, players have absolutely no idea the exact layout or contents of the level. Behind every door could be guards, cameras and killer robots. We just don't know. Again, a very enticing present to unwrap. Now, Into the Breach is a fantastic game, and follows the design philosophy outlined in my tenets almost to a T. Indeed, in a sense it's a perfect strategy game, akin to chess, as the player always has complete information turn to turn. No random chance to fail, no enemies hidden around dead angles. However, there's a reason I've never had any time for chess. Without a small degree of random bullshit, I personally struggle to get the same rush that allows for such a compelling gaming experience. I suppose upon reflection this does dip into some of B.F. Skinner's behaviorist psychology, operating as it does on a positive variable ratio reinforcement schedule. Fancy talk for random unpredictable things that our brains like completable levels and satisfying progress generated maybe on each level. Let's compare that quickly to Into the Breach, or chess, which, as stated, contains a lot of variability within levels and positions, but very little to surprise you once the levels start. It's thus much easier for me personally to resist that one more game feeling than it ever has been for Invisible Ink. So, those are my tactics tenets, and that's my take on Invisible Ink. But to be honest, all four of these games get a huge recommendation from me. I'll leave you with a short retelling of my favourite moment from my handful of playthroughs with Invisible Ink. I was caught, stuck in a terrible position. 4 guards all in front of me, all pointing their guns. Even a single step meant death for my poor agent. My other 2 agents were already in the elevator, totally ready to escape, and it looked like I was going to have to abandon my poor weapons specialist. I was staring at the screen, desperately clicking around for a solution, some ace in the hole, when I saw it. By a stroke of utterly blind luck, the agent had stolen a flash grenade from an unconscious guard some 30 minutes ago. I threw it at the group, taking them all down in one fell swoop, and dashed into the elevator, cheering and clapping all the way. My advice then, to people who perhaps think that a particular genre isn't for them, is to keep an open mind. Always be willing to try and learn something new, because if you're lucky, it might just be one of the more novel and enjoyable experiences of your gaming life. Honourable mention to SteamWorld Heist, which has the good grace to be short, as well as every bit as compelling, owing mostly to one mechanic, 2D manual aiming. Talk about a hint of randomness, albeit one with a very satisfying skill curve.